Who is the rudest celeb you have met? What happened? Stephen Baldwin and Chad Michael Murray both tried to get stuff for free and pulled the pulpit like Do you know who I am for something that was $5. Baldwin also gave his number to a teenage coworker, and we called it to see if it was real, not even thinking about caller ID. He spent the next year randomly calling her. My favorite celebrity encounter was making a smoothie for Gordon Ramsay. He was super nice and said he would be back later to get his friend something. The friend was David Beckham, who was also super nice, and they stayed and took pictures with everyone. I used to live in the same city as Tommy Lee Jones, and there was a point in time where if you worked in the service industry, you either had your own story about him or knew someone who did. I have a few of my own. Celebrity or not, he is, hands down, one of the rudest people I've ever come across. Very demanding and hateful. He looks down on service workers and treats them like shit, but at the same time expects them to simultaneously 1. Know who he is. 2. Not acknowledge who he is. But 3. Give him special treatment because of who he is. Got a call to David Spade's room at like 2 a.m. because he had issues with his Wi-Fi. When I told him I couldn't fix it and he had to wait for IT in the morning, he said in the most deadpan David Spade way, "I figured you wouldn't be able to fix it. I didn't figure they put their best and brightest on the graveyard shift." Mayo. 2 gems and a horror. Judi Dench, who was lovely, quite a twinkle in her eye, and just totally charming, and just as you'd imagine and hope her to be. Going back a long time, but in the early 1990s, I had a friend in London, HIV+, who was in hospital and very, very unwell. Not really thought he'd be alive for more than a month or two. Hospital staff were lovely, and visiting was pretty much as and when, just as long as you were quiet if it was late. I'd gone to visit him after a very long workday and was gowned up and chatting quietly to him. It was probably around midnight, and one of the nurses asked if he was up to another visitor, which he was. Princess Diana turned out to be the other visitor, and she was lovely beyond belief. Absolutely beautiful, very compassionate, and all on her own. One security guard who was with the nurse. She stayed for around an hour and was obviously a regular. The nurses said she often came in late at night, just slipping in with no fuss or fanfare and staying several hours at a time. I met her several times before my friend finally died, and she was always unfailingly kind and gentle. I summoned up the courage to ask why she did this so much. In those days, gay men, particularly HIV+ ones, were often sidelined and looked down on. She was quite matter-of-fact in that she felt she could offer something to people who didn't have much else, and it made her feel grounded in what was a very turbulent life to do it. After David had died and I went to collect his belongings, there was a card with a letter in it from her for me. I don't think I'll ever forget it, and I used to get angry with people who took against her. She wasn't perfect, I'm sure, but to me, she was a lovely and wonderful lady. To keep up with the general theme, though, and to echo others, Cilla Black was a complete bitch of the first order, and I don't really know anyone who ever had a good word to say about her. She lived not that far from my parents when I was a teenager and was notorious in the village for her appalling attitudes. Actually, Diddy came into a very popular place I worked after closing time. We kept the kitchen open with all of the staff there for his entourage. They came in 45 minutes late, ordered chicken teriyaki, cooked to order, and got up and left without paying because it took too long. World-class piece of shit, and here for all of it. Karma is an absolute bitch. Tommy Lee Jones. I was working as a security guard on the movie shoot for The Hunted. My second week on the job, I was posted in front of Tommy Lee Jones and Benicio del Toro's trailers on this side street in a residential area. Basically just stand there all day and make sure nobody fucks with anything. Day 1 was fine. I was there all day and never saw Tommy Lee Jones. Benicio came and went throughout the day and was super nice. He even came out and had a chat once. It was a trip because I had just seen him on TV the prior week accepting an Oscar. I congratulated him on that, and he was thankful. Just seemed like an all right dude that wasn't all up his own ass. Day 2 was a different story. I come in at 10 a.m. and relieve the overnight person. I'm standing there and this dog comes trotting up to me. Super friendly. I assumed it was a neighborhood dog that got out. It just kind of hung out with me for about 20 minutes until an SUV comes flying down the street and stops right before the barricade. I see an old man hop out of the back. He points and yells, "Hey!" and is walking toward me with a purpose. "Get the fuck away from my dog." It's at this point that I realize it's Tommy Lee Jones. I put my hands up and I say, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't know it was your dog." I don't know if he heard me, but he walked right up to me with his driver right behind him, ready to pull him back if he has to. He puts his finger in my chest and says, "Why is she out? Who let my dog out?" I tried to tell him she was out when I got there, and I had no idea it was even his dog. But I was only 20 and just completely scared out of my mind, so I was stuttering and stammering, and he kept interrupting me, demanding answers. By then, a few more of his people had gathered around, and someone got a hold of my boss. Then my phone rang, and it was my boss telling me to just go home for the day and it would get handled. I went home and called him later, asking if I should still come in tomorrow. He said, "Nope, you don't work here anymore." I tried explaining everything, but there was no getting through. So Tommy Lee Jones got me fired from a job for something I was not responsible for. This happened in the early 1990s. I handled security at a large corporate hotel in a Canadian city. Any big-name group that performed in our city stayed at our hotel. I was escorting Dolly Parton and Kenny Rogers from their guest floor to the lobby for their limo one morning at 4:30. I am 6'5", and when Ms. Parton approached me as I stood outside of the elevator, she said, in her sweet Southern Belle voice, "Y'all sure grow 'em big up here in Canada." She touched my arm in a friendly manner. She was just as sweet as pie. I blushed and instantly forgot everything about my job. Kenny did not even look at me as he boarded the elevator. I had put the elevator into individual use so it would stay on the floor with the doors open, but taken the keys with me. When it was time to descend to the lobby, in my flustered state, I had forgotten which of the roughly 30 keys on the ring controlled that elevator, despite having worked there for several years. There was a long pause while I searched the key ring, key by key, 2 or 3 times. Kenny was glaring at me the whole time, barely concealed rage bubbling just under the surface. I finally found the right key, but when I went to put the elevator back into group service, in my haste, I fumbled and dropped the keys. Kenny made a louder, exasperated sound, but Dolly came to my defense, touching my arm again and saying, "Sugar, you just take your time. We're in no hurry." Kenny made another noise, but Dolly shushed him. We eventually made it to the lobby, and I escorted them to the carport and their waiting limo. Kenny never even looked at me as he walked out the door and got into the car. Dolly, however, stopped to chat with me for a bit, thanking me, and then tipped me a $100 bill. That was more than I made in a day back then. She did the same for the bellman who had brought their luggage down. Total class act. That was my most favorite and least favorite celebrity at the same time. The rudest celebrity I ever met was Jack Nicholson. I asked him for an autograph, and he growled at me that he only signs autographs for chicks with huge tits. Flip side, nicest celebrity I ever met was Lemmy Kilmister from Motorhead. I was at a bar, and he sat down beside me. I was in awe and stammered out, "Let me buy you a drink." He said, "Nah, you can't do that." I was a little dejected and hung my head. He immediately burst out in laughter and said, "Kid, I'm a goddamned rock star. Let me buy you a drink." I then spent the night with Lemmy buying me Long Island iced tea while we talked about 60s British science fiction. I have some clients that interact with celebs, and I get fun stories. One client is a private pilot. He said the loveliest he's flown is Green Day. Like, he just went on and on about how sweet and genuine and thankful they are. He said Mike Pence was extremely polite, a true gentleman even though he can't stand his politics. He said Ariana Grande was a raging cunt and literally one of the worst people he's ever met. Trashed his plane. Insanely rude and demanding. He refuses to fly her anymore. I have a few clients that work in film. My God, do they love working with Nicolas Cage. Very professional and extremely personal. Likes to have deep conversations and connect with everyone on set and remembers everyone's names. I love hearing Nick Cage stories.